There we go. Hi, welcome everyone. We're just giving a few moments before we start. There's 3 more minutes until 1, and then we'll start the webinar, but welcome to everybody who is joining already. Okay, I think it's 1, so let's be on time and we will start now and let other colleagues join. I see we already have at least 50 participants, so very welcome to all of you to the opening webinar of the series of webinars on access to justice and effective remedies for children whose identity rights have been contravened, which I will be and have the pleasure to moderate today. My name is Valeria. I am the Statelessness Officer at the Statelessness section at UNHCR's Division of International Protection, which is in Geneva, but I'm currently actually calling you in from Skopje, North Macedonia. This webinar, this series is hosted by the Identity Rights Working Group, which is co-chaired by Child Identity Protection, CHIP, and the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion, ISI. And it is a follow-up of our expert meeting that was held in May and brought together several members of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, the CRC committee, the representatives of UN agencies, non-governmental organizations, academics, and persons with lived experience. This opening webinar will be exploring the profound impact on children who lack birth registration, documentation, and non-discriminatory access to nationality, featuring direct testimonies from individuals with lived experience. Before I hand over to our excellent speakers today, I'd like to highlight an exciting new initiative launched on October 14 this year, which is called the Global Alliance to End Statelessness. Through this collaborative effort, we will continue to advance our work to end statelessness and on also our work on broader identity rights, including, of course, children's rights. The Global Alliance to End Statelessness is a collaborative multi-stakeholder platform, which is led by UNHCR, and its vision is to create a world free from statelessness where everyone enjoys the right to a nationality without discrimination. The initiative is part of the UN Secretary General's Our Common Agenda and is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. A membership in the Alliance is open to a broad range of relevant stakeholders, which includes governments, regional organizations, stateless-led organizations, UN agencies, parliamentary organizations, civil society, of course, groups and networks, and faith-based organizations. For more information, please visit the Global Alliance to End Statelessness website, which you will see and find in the chat. Thanks to Sienna from CHIP, who is also supporting us today. And she will be sharing both links to the important resources that we would like to highlight, but also to the biographies, the extended biographies of all the speakers, so we save time. I would now like to proceed to our webinar. We're really fortunate to have a wealth of experience among our speakers today. So I would like to move directly to their presentations. We will have around 20 minutes for Q&A session at the end of their presentations. For that specifically, you will see a Q&A box at the towards the end of your screen, and please use that one to type your questions. You can indicate your name and organization if you wish, but also please kindly refer to the person you're addressing, to the panelist you're addressing the question to, or if it's to everybody, then just don't no need to indicate the name. And with that, I would actually like to already pass the floor to our first speaker, my colleague from UNICEF, Bhaskar Mishra, and the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, Valeria. Thank you, Chip and Isai, for this opportunity. Hello, everyone. My name is Bhaskar Mishra. I work with UNICEF headquarters, and I see Sienna has already left my introduction in the chat. So the nexus between identity, specifically legal identity, and access to justice is not just theoretical. It is profoundly practical and deeply impactful. Legal identity is fundamental to accessing justice and exercising human rights. Since the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights way back in 1948, every person is recognized as having a legal personality with inherent rights and duties. To claim these rights or seek remedies when they are violated, effective access to justice is essential. That's why this linkage is paramount. It goes without saying, and you might have heard very often, that recognizing the legal identity of a child is the first step in safeguarding their rights and ensuring their legal protection. A child without a legal identity is often invisible to the eyes of the law and society. This invisibility is not merely about being unknown, it is about being unprotected, unsupported, and unrecognized. And yet, this idea that people have an inalienable personal autonomy and identity is relatively new and has only recently been accepted as a universal principle, especially for children who are seen as dependent on their parents and caregivers to provide for them. It took quite some time for their personal autonomy and individual identity to be fully recognized. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, marked a significant turning point in this respect. Article 7 affirms every child's right to have their identity established immediately after birth through birth registration. This is the only time the CRC uses the word immediately, emphasizing the importance of getting this right from the start. Birth registration serves as the first official recognition of a child's existence before the law and gives the child a legal identity. It is this act, followed by the issuance of a birth certificate as proof of legal identity, that enables children to enjoy all other rights and access essential services. We must ensure that every registration is converted into certification, preferably through a one-step, one-widget process. This has become quite important. If you look at what is happening in countries, there is a gap between registration and certification. And in some countries like Kenya and Rwanda, the gap is quite significant. Article 8 of the CRC further emphasizes the right of the child to preserve their identity and to have their identity re-established in a speedy manner if illegally deprived of some or all the elements of their identity. This is particularly important in a world where more children than ever are migrating, have been forcibly displaced, or are unlawfully deprived of their identity. Around 1 in 66 children worldwide live outside their country of birth, which is a significant number. Children who do not have a legal identity are also at heightened risk of being stateless. You heard from Valeria about the new alliance. Because the facts contained in a birth certificate determine which nationality rules apply and therefore which nationality the child receives. Even though the CRC is supposed to apply to all children within the jurisdiction of a state without discrimination of any kind, being stateless often denies children the protection of the state in which they find themselves and its laws. But how can children exercise their rights and access justice and seek remedies if they do not have a legal identity and are not recognized by law in the state in which they live? Ensuring that children acquire a legal identity immediately after birth therefore becomes absolutely essential. So, where do we stand? Out of 383,000 children born every day today, 115,000 remain unregistered, almost 1 in 3. And another 46,000 go uncertified. That means their births are registered, but they don't have a birth certificate. So, unless this gap is bridged, countries will continue generating a backlog of unregistered children with dire consequences for the human rights and developmental outcomes. The good news is that we have made some significant progress since 2019, despite the devastating impact of COVID-19. UNICEF is going to release the 2024 global estimates next month, and that really raises some rays of hope. But countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, will have to accelerate the progress several fold to meet the 2030 target of universal birth registration. Even countries in other continents, they have to do quite a bit. We have a lot of countries that have been stagnating with 80-85%. So if they have to reach universal birth registration, they really need to focus on marginalized and vulnerable groups. So they need to have last mile strategies, which is extremely critical. There are still so many barriers, bureaucratic barriers, lack of awareness. Birth certificates, birth registration are not demanded as a matter of right. Fear of prosecution, especially in situations of armed conflict and displacements. Special challenges in humanitarian contexts. There are so many legal obstacles. Legal frameworks that do not have clear provisions for late and delayed registration, or penalize parents for late and delayed registration, or provisions in civil registration laws which prevent mothers from registering their child without the consent or presence of the father or other male relatives, or in case of migrant and displaced population, laws that explicitly exclude them from registration, or even discriminatory laws that strip certain children of their legal identity or nationality. I can go on and on. So, in this situation, what needs to be done? It becomes imperative for children to be able to access justice, to seek remedies to establish their legal identity. But this is often a vicious circle, as without a legal identity or a nationality, they are not recognized before the law and often unable to access justice and avail themselves of the laws that should protect them. It's a monumental, often insurmountable challenge. In terms of UNICEF's work, in 2013, we supported more than 70 countries on birth registration programming, including a humanitarian context. The births of 53 million children were registered with our support. Overall, in the past 3 years, UNICEF has supported the registration of more than 143 million births from 2021 to 2023. But still, there is a long way to go. Recognizing the legal identity of every child and ensuring it is preserved is a gateway to justice. And access to justice is the gateway to ensuring all children can claim their rights, including their right to an identity. The nexus is clear, confirming that all rights are universal, inalienable, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. Thank you very much. Let me stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bhaskar, for your presentation. I want to highlight a few key points. First of all, I think you mentioned the importance to get this right from the start is a very powerful phrase and kind of you know, this is what the convention is also all about, because with this, if we get this right, all other access to rights and enjoyment of those will be open for all children, and that is exactly what the convention talks about. Of course, another point is the universal birth registration, which all countries should strive for, and that is what the convention obliges them to do. And you mentioned a lot of barriers and challenges that still exist and that we are collectively trying to fight against. But I think we'll also focus a lot about the solutions that are in place through the other presentations of our speakers. And maybe one last point before I give the floor to our next speaker is that children who don't get their legal identity confirmed from the start become adults without legal identity as well. And also that, of course, strips children of their childhood. So I think it's, you know, it's quite simple and clear why we're talking about this today, but unfortunately we're not yet there. So there's quite a lot of work to do. But I want to stop here and pass on the floor to our next speaker to also hear about some solutions to our next speakers, actually. And the first one will be Terry Chiari. I hope I got the pronunciation right, from ATD Fourth World. Terry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Valerie, and thanks to Chip for organizing this session where we are going to speak about no justice without identity. And I would like to share about the challenges, recommendation, and some good practices and birth registration by ATD Fourth World. And I would like to emphasize that as the previous speaker has said, birth registration is fundamental for establishing legal identity, accessing basic service, and protecting rights. Yet millions of children across Africa remain unregistered, especially for reasons of extreme poverty of their families and communities. ATD Fourth World, an international non-governmental organization which works alongside and in collaboration with people or families in persistent poverty worldwide, has addressed this issue in recent years in various countries, namely Burkina Faso, Senegal, Central African Republic, Tanzania, and the Philippines, identifying both obstacles and successful strategies in very difficult contexts, as with children living on the streets, with families having lost all their papers due to flooding, or they are living in cemeteries. Therefore, let's check on the challenges and the good practices. Birth registration remains a difficult process for households who are struggling to meet their day-to-day needs. These multiple barriers include lack of knowledge about its importance, long distance to the nearest registration facilities, or fees involved in late registration. Social and institutional maltreatment is another hindering factor. Most times, public services do not necessarily reach the people in poverty, partly because the people whom public services are meant to reach and support sometimes do not claim the benefit they have a right to because of shame, because of fear of social and institutional abuses, or because they don't want to be in contact with social services that have been traumatizing them in the past. Furthermore, institutional procedures are very often too complicated and takes precious time away from earning money to feed their families. Another institutional maltreatment may be discrimination of children from a certain sociological, economic, ethnic, or religious background. Cultural practices can also deter formal birth registration process, where a mother's ability to register her child isn't possible without the father's involvement. A good example is in Senegal, where parents shared that due to Islamic religion, it is a responsibility of the father to give a name to a child. Therefore, he has to be physically present to announce, to formalize the chosen name. Let's check or look at the recommendation and some of the good practices from the experience of ATD Fourth World, working alongside families and children in extreme poverty. And our number one recommendation is birth registration should be accessible, simple and free, including the required supporting documents with a process that is standardized throughout the country. There shouldn't be fees charged for late registration or making corrections. Families cannot afford, especially in these tough economic times. The local government in some countries should be restrained from imposing some hidden unnecessary charges, such as a stamp payment, which are not legally permitted, but it's a way behind to get some money or to extract money from the families. All the information, the second point, all the information about the required documents should be clearly stipulated to avoid going and coming back during the registration process, making the process costly and time-consuming. And a parent in Burkina Faso said, "At the hospital, we didn't understand. As you were leaving, they sent us back and forth. We don't have money to keep going back. They didn't ask for all the documents needed at once. They asked for them one by one." Another one said, "My grandchild was born in the hospital, and we didn't know where in the hospital should we get or register for the birth certificate." The third one, the process should be devolved and satellite systems put in place for reaching out to families where they live. And we should have trained, registered community health workers or health volunteers, as well as village headmen who could help with the raising awareness about the process of acquiring the birth certificates for their children, who can as well help register births, or there should be mobile units that can service hard to reach communities. In a majority of countries in Africa, registrations are carried out in one centralized place, like in a city hall in most towns, where there are long queues leading to bribery and corruption, as well as a high rise of fake agents or brokers who pose as government officials, asking for money from parents in the villages to speed up the process, but end up disappearing in thin air. These discouraging practices make families lose trust with institutions. A parent in Philippines said, "I was born in the mountains. My mother was helped by a traditional midwife. She needed to travel one day to the city to register my birth. It was far, and that is why I don't have a birth certificate." The fourth one, incorporate support for birth registration and access to social protection in government, NGO programs, and in projects with young children. Create a supportive environment for illiterate parents who struggle to fill forms to claim certificates for their children. It is important for governments to work closely with the civil society organizations as partners in this process, if we want the poorest families and children not to be left behind. For example, in Tanzania, ATD Fourth World facilitated this project by ensuring families, activists, partners, and local authority navigated the process together, offering assistance, especially for those unfamiliar with the procedures or lacking literacy skills. This approach sustained the project for 8 years, achieving a significant milestone and empowering people in extreme poverty to participate in the welfare and development. The project outcomes for the families and certain activists have not only created a new momentum of engaging with authorities in obtaining the document, but have also instilled confidence in many to approach the registration, insolvency, and trusteeship agency district offices to finalize the acquisition process. The fifth one, carry out information campaigns to ensure that all families are aware of their children's rights to an identity and the importance of birth registration. Birth registration is not only a child's right, but it's crucial for the development of a country, as it provides essential data useful for planning, implementing policies related to healthcare, education, and social welfare. Therefore, registering a child's birth is not doing someone a service. The sixth and the last, the registrars should conduct community outreach to build trust and understand in depth the efforts and struggles of parents to register a birth. This can be achieved if the most excluded families are involved in dialogues where they give ideas and solutions that suit their context and needs. They are experts through lived experience, even though they often lack formal education. A parent in Dakar said, "I'm now an activist. I want the other parents to obtain birth certificate for their children. I now know the importance of these documents." Thank you very much.
Dear Terry, thank you so much for your presentation and especially for highlighting many good practices, but also recommendations. I think key point from your presentation is that access to birth registration is still a struggle for so many families across the world, and that services still do not reach, even if they're in place, they still do not reach those people who are in poverty or in vulnerable positions and situations. And I think a very important point you mentioned is especially around awareness of the parents, because from one side, even if the states offer services, the lack of awareness of parents and their situation may hinder the possibility to register the birth of the child. I think it's also important that you mentioned the training of relevant workers, because it's not only about those who register the birth per se, but also health workers and other workers that are involved in this whole process. So awareness should also be, and training and capacity building of those involved. I know you've highlighted a number of good practices, but also I encourage the participants to check the chat where you will see the links and resources and to use those. And also please follow the example of our colleague already who used the Q&A button, and we will also come back to their questions at the end of the presentations. But yeah, so please, if you have any questions, you can already post them there. Thank you, Terry. And we will move on to our next speaker, who will be Armando Augueio Cupi from the Unione Italiana Apolidi, which is the first stateless-led organization registered in Italy. But you can also read here his extended biography in the chat. Armando, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Valeria and colleagues, especially for organizing this webinar. It's very important. My name is Armando, as Valeria introduced me, and I'm the founder of the first stateless-led organization based in Italy called the Italian Stateless Union. But before going further on this side, I would like to introduce myself, explaining you why I'm stateless, because I am stateless since almost 30 years. So statelessness is a form of, let's say, violation of human rights that shapes in many different ways. In my case, I was born in a northern region of Italy, in a city called Sanremo. Then my biological parents, after some months, moved in Rome, and they were living in a neighborhood in which they were going to the family of this neighborhood, knocking at the doors, saying, "Oh, you take this kid for an amount of money, or we will kill him." So they found a family that took me with them, but they never denounced the fact, okay? Because there was a payment, let's say, behind this transaction, and it is illegal, obviously. And they were scared that something could happen to me or to them. So I only grew with a birth certificate that allowed me, at least at the beginning, to go to school until the first year of the high school. But unfortunately, I was very limited in conducting a normal life in a way, because, for example, I couldn't go to the doctor. I had to find a doctor that behind the payment could do the vaccination, this kind of things, and this kind of medical treatments. So it was a little bit hard to understand what was happening, because my friends, the people that I knew, they were conducting normal lives, but something with me was strange. So I discovered about my story, about this, let's say, adoption, just when I was 16, 17, when I been kicked from school. Because in Italy, when you reach the 16 years old, you can, if you want, you can't go to school if you want. So the school decided me to kick me out because I never brought them an ID. Okay, it was very important for them. So I was in a sort of limbo in which I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what my future would be. I I could see only my friends, my colleagues, my relatives. They were going, moving ahead with their lives, but I was stuck in the uncertain. So when I reached the majority age, we went to the municipality, thinking that was easy to get an ID, and we claimed for that. But unfortunately, they reject the application because I wasn't resident. Obviously, I only had a birth certificate. I didn't have an ID. I didn't have anything else. So of course I wasn't a resident. So we hired a lawyer, and through the lawyer, I started understanding what was my situation. I was stateless, probably. In the birth certificate, there were the names and the country of origin of my biological parents. They were Albanian. So we went to the Albanian consulate. We spoke with the consulate, and they did the sort of check about my biological parents, if they exist, if they not exist, where they are. The name never come out. So through that declaration, I've been able to go through the judiciary procedure in Italy that allow me through the statelessness determination procedure to go in front of a judge, bringing all the documents that I have in this case, school records, medical records, the declaration of the consulate, and the witnesses, that I was stateless and that I need a residence permit in order to conduct a normal life. So I've been able to get my first residence permit at the age of 20, and then my life changed. I start again working, and then I decided to move again to school, a school only for people who were working. So in 2 years, I get my diploma. Then I wanted to go to university, so I started university. I finished the university, I take the master, and in 2022, I decided to create the first stateless-led organization in Italy called Unione Italiana Polidi, which nowadays provide information campaigns on what is statelessness. We do trainings, we do advocacy campaigns, and we provide pro bono legal support to people who are stateless or are at risk of statelessness, okay? In addition to this, there are many things that, let's say, could be changed in Italy regarding the prevention of statelessness at birth. And let me just share my screen. The law, the Italian Citizenship Law 91 of the 1992, have safeguards against statelessness at birth, and this is the result of given by the 1961 Convention of Prevention of Statelessness. And the text says exactly that those who are born in Italy by known or stateless parents or cannot acquire the citizenship of their parents are Italian citizens by birth. That means that in Italy there is a sort of jus soli jus sanguinis for what concern statelessness at birth. But there is a problem in this sentence, in this law. The problem is very easy to catch. Here we are referring exclusively to the status of the parents. Okay. The status should focus and should revolve around the child, not on the status of the parents. One other very important thing is that if you are a child given to the birth by stateless, unrecognized parents, you remain stateless. You need to be recognized legally under the status in order to obtain your Italian citizenship. And this is not automatic, okay? You need to have different proofs, like the residence permit of your parents. So in this case, the statelessness residence permit. Or you need to have a declaration which your parents are unknown. Just in this case, if the person is a professional person behind the desk of the municipality, you will be able to, or your child will be able to acquire the Italian citizens. But there is a good pro here. that we need to consider that this law is retroactive. That means that if we go back to the past, we are able to give our status to our child. In this case, the child can be Italian citizen even if the mother or the father will be recognized as stateless in 3, 4, 5 years. Your child will acquire, even at a later stage, the Italian citizenship. And this is a very important thing. So there is a lot of work to do, especially on statelessness, but in particular focus and prevention of statelessness, because in Italy we have 2 status determination procedure, okay, and this is good, but they, in certain sense, some of them are restrictive. So we need to keep it up with the work and I mean, work together with the joint efforts to let's make the things work. And thank you very much.
Dear Armando, thank you so much for your presentation. First of all, I want to sincerely thank you for sharing your personal story. I know it's not easy, but I think it really highlights the effects that this can have on a child. And then now you being an adult and sharing it, I think it's important to show those, our participants and speakers to share this. But I want to also mostly focus on the expertise and the hard work that you have been doing for the stateless people in Italy. With your organization and also beyond, of course, now, because I know you're sharing practices with others as well. And I think with this example, that you've shared on the screen with the law, you've kind of highlighted how sometimes one word or the formulation can really lead to such a challenge and obstacle and just block the whole process. So I think your example highlights the importance of the fact that the nationality legislation and other relevant acts, whether it's Civil Registry Act, etc., should be in line with international legal framework, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is the most widely ratified international convention globally. So I think we're still not there, despite even the ratification. The second step is always implementation, so even if the law is fixed, it's important that it's effectively implemented. But yeah, thank you for sharing that example. And I know we will share the bios of the speakers in a bit. We have a bit of technical issues with the chat, but don't worry, we'll share the resources as we go along. And while we do that, I would like to pass the floor to our next speaker, who is Alexandra Semirac, who is representing European Network on Statelessness today. Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Valeria, and thank you also to the Identity Rights Working Group for the invitation to join this webinar and to be here, to have the opportunity to contribute to the discussion on the importance of the rights to identity and nationality of children. As in the case of the previous speakers, my own experience of childhood statelessness has provided me with a unique understanding of the challenges and uncertainties faced by those without a recognized nationality. And based on this experience, but also in my role as Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees of the European Network on Statelessness, which I have the honor also to represent today, and let me share my screen also so that you can have some notes on the organization. Voila, I think it's working now. The European Network on Statelessness being a regional network working with stateless persons to advocate for their rights, including ending childhood statelessness as a core mission. And through these 2 roles or hats, I would like to address the topic of today's webinar, but by outlining 3 themes within the European context, including good practices and some still continues challenges. First, birth registration. Second, determining nationality at birth. And third, children on the move. So first, it is important to remind that accessing birth registration is not accessing directly a nationality, but a birth certificate is key in providing the essential information linking individuals to a state, either through the principle of jus sanguinis or the principle of jus soli. Therefore, it's important to note that its absence can contribute to the difficulties of providing such links and significantly increase the risk of childhood statelessness, which can then imply that children are exposed to exploitation, to child marriage, to trafficking, to forced recruitment, and severe disadvantages in accessing fundamental rights and services, many of which have already been shared also by Terry and by Armando. One way to understand this better is through the Statelessness Index, which is an online comparative tool that has been developed by the European Network on Statelessness, and which assesses how the currently 32 available countries in Europe protect stateless people and what they are doing to prevent and reduce statelessness. Through the index, through the data available in the analysis in the index, we can see that despite an overall high birth registration rates in Europe, there are still barriers that persist, and in certain countries, preventing that universal registration from happening. There's also still a lack of standardized procedures and evidential requirements to grant access to birth registration across Europe that lead to inconsistent practices, which becomes a considerable challenge in cases where, for example, the exact time and place of birth cannot be proved, or where parents are stateless or undocumented. This leads to discriminatory practices towards also particular groups such as the Roma and Ashkali communities in Eastern and Southern Europe, to a lack of accessibility to digitalized procedures and some necessary extra steps, as for example, paternity declarations, DNA tests, or others that hinder this universality that is so much needed to become an actual reality. But there are also good practices that can be checked of safeguards that exist, as the ones implemented in Albania, for example, to incentivize early registration through monetary compensation, or to flag unregistered birth to the Child Protection Unit for mandatory ex officio registration, or those, for example, implemented by Spain to guarantee access to late or out of time birth registration, which can make an impact in decreasing the risk of childhood statelessness. Second, it is also urgent to address the lack of guidance and formal procedures in many European countries to determine nationality at birth, especially in cases where a child born to non-nationals would otherwise be stateless. There is a big variety of existing practices that imply that children's nationalities can depend on the parents' marital status, that they can be discretionarily registered or not, that their nationality can be wrongly assumed or labeled as unknown, leading to legal inconsistencies and the risk of unrecognized statelessness situations. Only in Germany, for example, approximately 30,000 children are cataloged as having an unclear nationality. The lack of statelessness determination procedures that are based on child rights, or also the subsequent nationality recognition, in some cases only available at the age of 16 or after 18, severely limits the effective enjoyment of the rights and the access to services of children, and leave them in a prolonged limbo against their best interest. There are also commendable practices which can be easily expanded to other countries. In Spain, the country where I currently reside, and also the country of my finally nationality, children born stateless can automatically acquire nationality if otherwise stateless, without the burden of proving that they cannot access another nationality. And similarly, in neighboring France, children born to unknown or stateless parents, or whose parents cannot transmit their nationality, are automatically granted French nationality at birth. Finally, third and finally, it is alarming that only half of European states have introduced comprehensive legal safeguards to prevent childhood statelessness, which is particularly worrying for children in migration and forced displacement context. Some countries do not include in the civil registry the birth of refugees and migrants, or they issue documents that do not hold the same legal weight as birth certificates. Facilitated naturalization for children of refugees born on the territory after 1 year of residence in Spain, for example, exemption from applying to diplomatic authorities in case of refugees in Belgium, or protection of persons with irregular residence status from being reported by public civil registry officials here in countries like, for example, Switzerland, are unfortunately only exceptions rather than a norm between the different European countries. So there is a special need for attention to be given to children also born in transits to Europe, as many countries, transit countries, lack provisions to issue birth certificates in cases also where the country of arrival was reached without a valid registration document. If some provisions exist, some of these depend on the residency status or recognition of the parents or the child, contravening the principle of non-discrimination and increasing the risk of statelessness. Just to highlight another good practice of Spain, there has been a landmark judgment that was issued in 2021 by a first instance court, holding that in the case of a child that is born on the journey to Europe, living in Spain, and whose birth or nationality was not registered by any other country, the Spanish authorities should register the child's birth as in the territory to respect the child's right to be registered as soon as possible after birth. This type of case law can serve also as a tool for better understanding and for strategic litigation. And the European Network on Statelessness has developed also a free online resource containing summaries of national and regional case law, convening European and international jurisprudence addressing statelessness, which anyone can access through the available link. The lack of standardized procedures for the identification of statelessness, as I was mentioning also previously, during the registration and nationality screening procedure at arrival can cause discriminatory practices. And these can be aggravated by the lack of awareness, by the lack of resources and training to the officials and to the persons affected by the situation. The misconceptions that happen in this context can lead officials to record a child's nationality as undetermined, as unknown, or they can also lead to assign their parents' nationality without verifying whether that nationality is effective or not. State Free, a stateless-led organization that is also a member of the European Network on Statelessness, has conducted a participatory research project with the aim of creating a prototype for a digitalized statelessness determination procedure in Germany, which is lacking one, based on the positive experiences of other European statelessness determination procedures. And the evidence of this research has proved that there's an existence of arbitrary decisions by authorities, that there's discrimination, othering, and trauma, provoking trauma, especially in the cases where statelessness was experienced as a child. So just in the context of children on the move, there is another critical issue that needs to be highlighted, which is the risk of arbitrary, unnecessary, and prolonged periods of migration detention for stateless children. Return proceedings can also increase the risk of statelessness, particularly when children are deported without birth certificates or other essential documents. So in this context, unaccompanied children can be exposed to even greater hurdles due to the lack of guidance, specialist support, and information about their rights. In order to address these challenges, and just to finalize, I do not see the chat, Valeria, so I'm not sure. I think I'm just about to finish my available minutes. So to address this challenge, the European Network on Statelessness in pursuing its strategic goals, recommends that states in Europe, but also abroad, can ensure this immediate free birth registration and certification for all children, that mandatory reporting requirements are removed, that safeguards are implemented and improved in accessing the nationality rights, that the procedures to determine a child's nationality and identify statelessness are enhanced, that data, the available data on the local, national, and regional level is improved, and that there is capacity that is built to raise awareness among officials, among civil society, among those forcibly displaced and affected by statelessness in order to provide effective solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thanks so much for your presentation, and also for highlighting that you had a lived experience also of statelessness, but mostly also focusing on the expertise that the European Network on Statelessness brings and your work with them, especially for sharing the two important tools that are accessible to all. I apologize, we have a few technical issues with our chat, but I've shared just the link to CHIP's website that has all the bios included, etc. And we will also follow up with an email. This, for some reason, the chat doesn't want to be cooperative with us today, but nevertheless, and also to thank you to all who are very active in the Q&A, which we will go back to. But back to Alexandra's presentation, the tools that include the index and the case law database. I think also important to say how valuable it is that there are already cases on this and that there is caseload. So I think it's also good that you're highlighting the importance of access to justice through having these cases brought to courts and having decisions on them, because I think it will influence the many statelessness cases that we have not only in Europe but elsewhere. And I think also I hope that for many who are not familiar with Europe laws and situation generally, it's still eye-opening that there are so many issues still to be covered and addressed, including that it's not 100% universal birth registration, and that kind of we can take for granted, even in the region of Europe, but also the importance of how situations of vulnerable children, especially including those children on the move who enter Europe, we should really find solutions for them, because it's still an ongoing situation and there's still so much to be done. So thank you for that, and also for highlighting the good practices. I will not repeat them, but you've listed quite a few, and I think that's what we are trying to focus here is on solutions and good practices to share with the others and other countries and regions. So thanks for that. And with that, I will actually start moving to our last panelist for today before we open the Q&A, who is Ms. Velina Todorova, who is the CRC committee member. Thank you for being with us today, and I'll pass the floor to you to highlight the key issues before we open the floor and have the panelists answer other questions. Thank you, Velina.
Thank you, Valeria. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you to previous speakers for actually giving us a good presentation of the issue of today. And I will try to, of course, I will speak about the experience of the committee under the convention. But let me start with the clear statement that the child's right to identity is an independent right, but also the gateway for accessing other rights. We heard about that already. The child identity right depends on the birth registration. This is the very clear link between both. Identity right and birth registration are protected under the international law. Let me just mention Universal Declaration, Article 15 about right to nationality of everyone. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 24, speaking about immediate registration after the birth. and the right of the child to acquire nationality. There are two other UN conventions specifically dealing with nationality and from the statelessness point of view. And I would like to mention that CRC is universally ratified, but these two conventions already still haven't reached this level of ratification. Rather, they are ratified by less than half of the UN states, one by 1999 and the other one by 1 state. So ratification of this convention is the first recommendation that the committee make to a state coming for review if the state has not ratified the state convention. There are also two European conventions, but I'm not going to go deeper in that. And then we reach Convention on the Rights of the Child. I would like to, we know the two articles, 7 and 8, that are important for our topic, but I would like also to mention two general comments of the committee that are dealing particularly with this issue. General comment 6 on the unaccompanied children migration, and more recent general comments 23 and 24, joint general comments on the principles and rights of children in the situation of international migration. Making this short, brief overview, I would like to say that states definitely are obliged to respect, protect, and fulfill the child's rights to identity. And they are obliged to ensure immediate and universal birth registration of every child born on their territory. Under Article 7, actually our convention puts all elements of child's identity, and all of them are protected under the convention. Namely, the name, child should have the name. The registration should include the date of birth. It is essential element of child's identity, particularly in cases where the child enters age determination procedures in the context of criminal proceedings or migration. These two elements, including the sex of the child, form the personal identity of the child, then names of parents that creates a family identity of the child, the rights towards the parents or family or relatives, and nationality that establishes the link to the state responsible to guarantee all human rights of the child. All these elements must appear in the birth certificate. However, if the parents are unknown, of course, their names should not appear, but birth certificate, birth registration should not be dependable on existence of parents. Birth registration, as I said, it is important, is a standalone right of the child, which implementation I have already mentioned must not depend on the availability of parents or their names. For example, abandoned children, foundlings, or children born to undocumented parents should be registered immediately at birth. When children that are not registered at birth or cannot prove their registration by lacking birth certificate, they are rendered, as we heard already, as legally invisible. And therefore, they are disposed to severe forms of human rights violations, and they are also unable to enjoy their basic rights. Also the lack of legal existence. The child is no one before the law, makes impossible for them to establish legal personality and access to justice. And lacking access to justice undermines all the very existence of the child. They cannot restore entitlements, they cannot claim discrimination, etc. The committee's position on this issue is that the state parties must ensure comprehensive free of charge birth registration and issuance of birth certificates for all children immediately. Comprehensive means including all elements of the child's identity, and universal to cover all children born in the territory, and should be immediate. There are not excuses. Committee does not take any excuses for not implementing this right by the state. As a birth certificate is very important. It's an entry point to various type of documentation that come afterwards and that prove the identity of the child, such as identity card. The child at certain age is entitled to receive identity card, then a passport, which has a photo of the child, and these documents already prove that the child reaches a certain level of autonomy and could be mobile without the support of parents. Committee in many occasions identified the reasons why children actually do not have birth registration or do not hold birth certificates. Particularly, this is vital in cases of migration, internal displacement of children, conflicts, when the child may temporarily lose the link with parents or the state of origin. What are the most frequent violations that committee observed during the past 2 years? As it was already said, lack of knowledge of parents about this right and the need of birth certificate and the value actually of the birth registration, difficult access to birth registration in terms of physical distance, costs, fees, heavy documentation requirement, lack of capacity of the birth registration system. I would call all of them institutional violence or structural violation of the right of the child. And I will invite everyone of you, which state is party to the third optional protocol to the committee, to try to start a procedure of inquiry of this violation. There is another big issues associated with birth registration when the states associate registration and nationality, which is completely not true. For example, we had that example in Bhutan, where the children born on the territory but to non-nationals are not registered at birth. Discriminatory laws and practices are quite frequent in the states of Africa and Latin America. For example, this relation between the status of parents and child is could create a big barrier. Also, gender bias norms and stereotypes. For example, children born to single mothers or mothers, non-married parents. This obligation for the father to be present is completely a complete barrier. I said already about abandoned children, children in the situation of migration, indigenous children, etc. And another barrier is created by internal or international crisis. I already mentioned about this mass displacement or crisis. The committee considered that all these circumstances place the child in a situation of vulnerability. And here we have children born in rural areas, remote areas, poverty, children living in poverty, indigenous backgrounds, African children of African descent in some Latin American states, Roma children in some European states, children with disabilities in some African states, children whose parents are deprived of liberty, migrant, asylum-seeking, refugee children, including children in street situations, and including cases where the birth registration depends on the marital status of parents. Nationality, briefly, it's not the same as birth registration. The conventions speak about acquisition of nationality, and it could be done as far as possible. it occurs either automatically at birth following the nationality of parents, or the other cases on the basis of territory where the child is born. And here we have this UN Convention of Reduction of Statelessness. We heard a lot about procedure of identifying the statelessness of the child. I'm not going to speak about that, but actually we find this procedure in a few countries, and we usually and always recommend to the states to establish this procedure to identify if the child is stateless. Then the problem of children born abroad, to their nationality to be recognized in their the country of the nationality of their parents, documented stateless parents. I already said that. Also, we had some states that have the procedure of deprivation of nationality of parents, which actually affects children. I can give you an example about the recommendations given to the state in order to avoid statelessness and establish a nationality of children. Just wanted to mention that this issue appears to be really very important when children are in situation of migration, or stay in refugee camps in foreign countries. And here the birth certificate and all the documents that the child might have are very important to establish the child's status in the foreign country. And here we are facing problems with false documents, false birth certificates, false passports, which really create another additional difficulty and troubles for children, and many other violations of their rights. And there are many recommendations on this issue made by the committee. I don't have time to go to all these recommendations, but if there are questions, I could easily answer and name some of the most important recommendations related to birth registration and nationality of children. And thank you very much. I have 1 minute less in use 1 minute less.
Thank you so much, Velina, for the timekeeping, first of all, but also for the information you've provided. I think we wish we had more time to listen to you, also because you have such a vast experience in the cases that you've dealt with across the world, globally, and the committee, also your fellow co-members. But I think you've kind of highlighted the key, you've explained it in very easy terms, what the convention means, because of course we've all read the articles 7 and 8, which are, the key ones that we are discussing today, but it's all kind of legal text, and I think you've managed to explain it into practical terms. What does it mean for all children that we're actually trying to mention and discuss today? So thank you very much for that, and for the recommendations, and also for some examples that you have given to us. Also to just thank all the speakers again for your time and for your presentations, and also for our audience, because they have been very active in the Q&A box, and also have shared some good practices, examples from their own countries, and how it functions, how the birth registration functions in their countries, including India and Bangladesh. And also we have an example from Nepal, where there were recently amendments to the law. However, there's still things to be done. Not everything is perfect, unfortunately, yet. I know there have been also questions from the participants in terms of presentations and the recording of the webinar, which will be placed on CHIP's CHIP website. So I've shared the link already to the website's page of the webinars in the chat, but we'll share it again at the end of this webinar. Without further ado, I want to raise a few questions with the speakers that we've received through the chat, which I think are very important to discuss further. One of them is about the awareness and what to do, actually. What are the solutions when there's lack of awareness of importance of registering children, whether because of fear of approaching the authorities, or simply because there's lack of knowledge about it, and understanding why do we need to register children as soon as possible and why this is important for their future. And I know, Armando, you wanted to take the floor
Yeah,
to
thank you very
elaborate.
much. And thank you also to Saidul Islam for this question. And more than question is a reflection, because yes, there are still parents that are not aware about the importance of their children to be registered. And this happens, of course, in many marginalized society in which there are these communities. Now, I want to give a couple of examples in the Africa sub-Saharan. There are several communities that lives in rural areas, and they, for example, lived all their entire life within that area. Okay, me, for example, I'm Armando. I live there, but happens that once that I want to move out from that area, I won't be able to do that because I don't have documents. Everybody knows me. I'm Armando, but legally I'm no one because maybe my parents didn't register me. So what's one of the most important documents that a stateless person should have is the birth certification, is this birth certificate, because it establishes the legal identity of an individual. And this happens also in Italy, since it's my field of expertise. For what concern, for example, the Roma, some of the Roma community that are scattered in the countries. They live in a marginalized place, very bad healthy condition, and they live all the entire life inside camps. So most of the time they don't know what happens outside the camps in terms of uh, legal news, what I can do for my children, these kind of things. And when you explain them that in order to acquire nationality or the importance to register the children, they are very discouraged. Because, for example, when you talk with them and you tell them that in order to acquire nationality, you need to wait more or less 10 years, many of these people will answer you that they prefer to have their children in this status, under this status, or to don't do that, to don't do nothing at all, because they are discouraged, because the bureaucracy is very slow, is very restrictive, and they cannot do anything in order to improve it. But it's, for example, like action that we are doing today with this webinar, in which there are joint stakeholders that talk about this kind of situation and experiences, that we can do something. So information, awareness, maybe trying to change the game in a way. Thank you.
Thank you, Armando, for that and for sharing the example. And I see Velina, you would like to add on that as well before we go to the next question. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, it is right. But these the parents should not be blamed. It's not their fault. It's not their task actually. It's the state that is responsible to reach out these parents and to make and to register their children. It's absolutely it's as I said, no excuse. So the committee, knowing this situation, always recommends to the state to facilitate particularly registration in remote areas, establishing mobile teams to do registration, to make officials doing outreach visits to rural or remote areas, and it's very important also to establish so-called birth registration corners in the health facilities or hospitals. Parents for no reason should be penalized, the committee says, and also to establish this multi-agency coordination between birth registration offices, healthcare, and schools. And schools could be also a place where children can have their birth certificate issued. And there are many good practices in many countries that use school for late birth registration, and absolutely state should waive fees, simplify procedures, etc. So this is what I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Velina. And actually, Bhaskar, I wanted to go to you about the interoperability and the importance of interconnection. So please go ahead. Yeah, I know you.
So thank you very much. And before I talk about interoperability, let me emphasize something which is very important but very often ignored. and especially when countries are going for digitalization. Okay. The CRBS business process, because if a baby is born in a health facility, I don't see any reason, like why that the birth of that baby cannot be registered and certified. Okay, what is the need for, like for parents to go to district registrar's office, and that to multiple times, like this doesn't make any sense in 2024. Okay. Because for birth registration, what you need proof of birth, like the hospital has all relevant document information, like name, date of birth, place of birth, sex, parents detail, like, so you have the strongest credentials available at the health sector. So please look at your business process, like I saw somebody, like wrote something about Bangladesh. The biggest problem with Bangladesh is not lack of awareness, because if you compare the birth registration rate in rural areas, that's much better than what is in the urban areas, because they are not utilizing the opportunities from the health sector. Of late, they have started using DHIS to data for notification, but come on, like in 2024, we don't want to be satisfied with notification. Like, go for declaration, go for registration. That is what is needed. So the business process is extremely critical. Make it one step, one visit. Okay, and we did a study, like a couple of years. So if you fail to capture your client at the first point of contact, and then which is say at birth, and then you try to capture them at the second point of contact, which is vaccination, the drop was of almost 28 percentage points. Okay, and then the moment, like the processes of late and delayed registration set in, I can tell you it is cumbersome, it's costly, like it's prohibitively expensive, and then there is no appetite for parents to go for it. So the simple solution is utilize opportunities coming from the health sector. Belina talked about education, social protection interventions. Education and social protection interventions are excellent opportunities to identify unregistered children and refer them back to the system. Okay, schools can also, they can also do registration. When I was deputy registrar in India, I used this in a big way in several states for clearing the backlog. And the last point, that please always remember, there is a difference between registration of newborns and clearing the backlog. Unfortunately, what happens, because most countries, they don't have the stock, because the registration of newborns is say 60-70%, so they don't have the flow. So consequently, every 2, 3, 4 years, all efforts, go towards just clearing the backlog. Come on, you need to clear the backlog in one go. Okay, pay more emphasis towards setting up the system, and that system should be for everyone. Another thing I want to, like say about Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, they have, like a fully digitalized system that is called BDRIS. But you know that during birth registration, they issue a unique ID number. But unique ID number is only issued to citizens. Okay. So, like you cannot use all these digitalization efforts for exclusions. Okay. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhaskar, very much for highlighting that. And I think there's a few questions on the good practices, but I think we can share that in the links to some publications on resources that are available, because there is quite a few good practices in that area, interoperability of different sectors, including health, but also education that you mentioned, etc. I'd like us to move to another question for now, and then, sorry, Terry, do you want to fill in on this, and then I'll move to the other one, please.
I think I would want to comment on the raising of awareness. And I would say that oftentimes families which are living in extreme poverty, they are excluded socially and they don't get a chance to participate in maybe in coming up policies, in a country. And so oftentimes they do not know what goes on in the country. And if they are meant to participate, for example, in this birth registration process, it will be difficult for them because oftentimes they do not have the literacy skills. And it's important when you're raising awareness, it should be in the language that the people understand. And an example is like in Senegal, you find that it's only 26% of men and women who understand Wolof, who understand French, and the rest of the citizens understand Wolof and other languages. So you can imagine that the administrative forms that you're supposed to fill for birth registration is in French. That means it's very difficult, and families give up, or they tend to lose the appetite to go and register births. And as well, lack of internet. If you are going to, governments are moving, they're digitalizing the birth registration processes, but you find that families living in extreme poverty, they have other priorities, and maybe access to internet is not, they are struggling to live, to access basic needs. So if you are to raise awareness, we should put into consideration all these factors.
Thank you very much, Terry. You really highlighted why it's important it's accessible, and then you explained what it means, but not only language and distance and availability, but also many other things. So thank you for highlighting that.
Just to mention, filling of these documents should not be a task for parents. It should be civil servants that are paid for that. They should fill the documents in, which means increasing the capacity of the offices, birth registration offices, but not parents. They shouldn't be obliged to.
Thanks, Valina. Yes. I want us to discuss the next question that a colleague posted also in the Q&A box. I think it's important about the about the benefit of registration officials having the job to identify a child's nationality. A colleague from Judith, actually from UK, says that it's not done in the UK, and she feels it's important not to do it for reasons that Alexandra highlighted in her presentation, but I'd like Alexandra maybe to ask you to elaborate a bit further. Why is it often, when it's done badly, with the default position of unknown in brackets, why it's actually harmful to register the child as such? Alexandra, please.
Definitely, and thank you, Valeria, for raising it, and Judith for asking the question or sharing the comment. It is definitely an issue when it's done without the necessary information and without the necessary training to identify correctly a nationality, or to identify the possible risk of statelessness. So I believe Mia was responding also in the Q&A that there are some minimum informations that need to be, according to ECOSOC, that need to be included. And nationality is not a necessary one. But rather than saying that since there are errors or misinformation or unknown nationalities or categories like unknown nationality or unclear nationality that are being included in the birth registration, rather to avoid including the nationality, the effort that needs to be done is to provide the necessary training for correctly identifying nationality when it exists, and to correctly identify the risk of statelessness, and then refer the family and the child to the necessary processes in order to identify first the statelessness, and then provide the next steps to access or being granted a nationality. So the existence of the error should not make us choose a path that just avoids this information to be added to the birth registration, but rather to provide the means and the resources in order to for officials who are faced with this registration to have the necessary tools where to check that information, the necessary tools to refer also the children to the processes of identifying the risk of statelessness that there might be in. So instead of like putting wrong information, first check correctly if there is a risk, and only include that information if it's 100% certain.
Thanks so much, Alexandra, and Bhaskar, please. Ed.
So, I want to bring another element. And recently I attended a side event when the migration report was released a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. So one thing that we have noticed, so when the nationality or the place of country of parents are not known, civil registers, they will write like unknown, not known kind of stuff. In case you are not sure about that, please leave those data fields blank, because the moment you write something, then the amendment process is set in. So you understand the amendment process in civil registration system is extremely cumbersome. So if tomorrow, if the parents wants to get his nationality or place of country, because he or she has the document, then he or she will have to first go through the amendment process. So our recommendation is leave those fields blank. And the second point is, even if you are capturing in your birth register, like in certain contexts, that's quite important. So we won't say that countries should not collect it. But even if you are capturing in birth register, there's no need to reflect those information in birth certificates. Okay, and now because of digitalization, this is happening. Like countries are going for it. Like Cambodia recently, if you look at even they used to do in the past, but even in the new amended act, they mentioned like the nationality of the child, also the mother and the father. And this is absolutely a discriminatory practice. Like, so whatever you need to do your birth register, but please leave all these away from birth certificates. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bhaskar. And yeah, I think we've kind of covered a lot on this issue. There's one more question I'm mindful of the time, and I want us to be sharp as on time. There's one question that I think I would like to raise is about the status of children, refugee children registered in birth, registering their birth in countries which are not signatory to the 1951 Convention on refugees. I wanted to mention that beyond these conventions, even if the state parties are not, if the states are not parties to this convention or the conventions on statelessness, whatever it is, there is other principles of international law that are beyond that, which are principle of non-discrimination and principle of the best interest of the child, also which the committee always focuses on. So even if they haven't signed these conventions, believe me, there are countries that have and still don't even implement what is supposed to be implemented. So, okay, signature is important, of course, and we emphasize the importance of acceding to those instruments because they're there for a reason. Even if that is not in place, the best interest of the child should be at the heart of it, and the principle of non-discrimination. These are core
Not
principles.
only, CRC is always there. CRC can be applied in all the situations, humanitarian. So it's not only best interest, it's the right. It's a right of the child. And it's the obligation of the state to implement this right. And it's not, as it was said, it's not a favor to parents or to the child. It is just an obligation of the state under CRC if there is no other source of.
Thank you. I want to say thank you very much to the audience. It has been very active in with the questions, and we've tried to reply even to, because there's also comments and good practices that were shared. We highlighted them and tried to reply with Mia together to them. I want to also say thank you to a colleague that shared his own personal story, that he's finally has legal identity was established at 42. This should not have waited until he turned 42, and that is why I think our discussion today is extra important. This should be fixed. If this right, what Bhaskar said at the beginning, if this right is done right, then all the others will also follow. So I think that I'll leave it at that. The importance of birth registration cannot be underestimated, and I think with all the panelists, we try to convey that message today to all of you. So thank you very much to the speakers, first of all, and to the audience for being very active and involved and interested in this. We've shared the link to the website again and the chat, so you can have it, and then we'll upload the recording and the materials there. I also very much encourage all the participants to register and attend the 3 other upcoming webinars, which will happen later in the months to come, actually, because they cover similar, but the aspects of the topics are a bit different. And we will also talk about the importance of birth registration in emergencies, but also many other themes that we haven't touched upon today. But I think I'll leave it at that, as I don't see more questions, and I will thank again our speakers, our wonderful and excellent speakers, and the participants for finding the time and attending this webinar today.
Thank you.
I'll leave it at that, and thank you so much for everything, and have a good day or evening wherever you're based. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Great.